how do we know that the generational trauma exists? Hi, my name is Patricia. I'm a psychologist registered with HCPC here in the UK. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some really interesting research telling us that actually trauma can be passed through many generations. The first research that we're going to be looking at is the research conducted by Rachel Yehuda, who's a professor of psychiatry and neuroscience, and who's an expert in post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And she conducted actually many studies involving victims of Holocaust and also their children who actually might not have experienced a Holocaust themselves. So she actually conducted very specific research looking at the cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and its effect on the brain in context of trauma. And what she discovered is that the levels of cortisol in victims of Holocaust and also their children, they were low. And these low levels of cortisol actually predispose the children to re-experience the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder of their parents. And actually that was a quite controversial study because until recently we only associated stress with high levels of cortisol. But in context of chronic post-traumatic stress disorder, the levels of cortisol, they actually can be suppressed. So Yehuda, she conducted another research in context of cortisol, and she found that also there were veterans and also mothers who were pregnant during the World Trade Center attack and who later developed post-traumatic stress disorder. They all show low levels of cortisol. And what is also really interesting, Yehuda, she found these low levels of cortisol not only in people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, but also in people who suffer from chronic unexplained pain conditions, which very often are actually associated with trauma. So what that might mean is that someone might actually experience trauma, but they might not actually have active symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, but in a way they might be experiencing the post-traumatic stress disorder in their body by somatizing. So because of Yehuda, we actually know that children of parents who've experienced trauma and then develop post-traumatic stress disorder, they are 3 times more likely to actually develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, even though themselves they haven't experienced the trauma. So because of her research, now we actually know that we can actually inherit the trauma from our parents and grandparents. Because till recently, we believe that we can more of like absorb the trauma by maybe hearing certain stories, by maybe seeing certain things. So another really interesting research that indicates that trauma can be passed through generations is research conducted by Dr. Bruce Lipton, who for many decades actually studied how our body cells, they absorb and process information. So he argued that mothers who are still pregnant, they can biochemically actually change the genetic material of the children who are still not born. As we obviously know, mothers, when they are pregnant, they pass certain nutrition to their children. And in the same way, they can also pass certain hormones. And those hormones, they're gonna be activated, triggered because of certain emotions that they are experiencing while they are pregnant. These chemical signals, they're gonna activate very specific receptor proteins in a cell body, and that in turn then will trigger different metabolic, behavioral and physiological responses in a mother's body and then as well in a fetus body. And what is also really interesting and amazing about the research that Lipton has conducted by contributing as well to the field of epigenetics is that only about 2% of our DNA is actually responsible for transferring traits such as our skin color, eye color, hair color. So these are the traits that are solid and they cannot be changed. On the other hand, the 98% of our DNA, which is called also the non-coding DNA, is actually responsible for many of the behavior or personality or emotional traits that we're gonna inherit. And those traits, they can actually be adjusted depending on the needs of the environment. So if the mother, she's experiencing, for example, chronic stress, that's gonna impact the DNA of the baby. The DNA of the baby will be reshaped according to the levels of stress that she's experiencing. And that, if we think about the generational trauma, that will be done in a way to prepare the baby for this quite hostile environment where the mother is living, because obviously the baby is going to live in the same environment. So another really interesting research in the area of epigenetics, it is within the research that was conducted on mice. And you might think, why mice? Why poor mice? But the reason for that is because we actually share very similar genetic blueprint. And surprisingly, it is 99% of our genetic material that has a counterpart in mice. So it is actually, I think, common knowledge that children or babies who are separated from their mother at birth, they experiencing certain challenges in life. And then we have a research that has been conducted on mice where the baby mice, they have been separated from their mother. And the research indicates that yes, the mice, they show increased level of stress, and they become more vulnerable to stress later in life. And what is really interesting about this research is that this vulnerability to stress doesn't actually stop only on one generation, but actually can be passed through many generations of mice. So that will be it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that now you have better understanding that except only the post-traumatic stress disorder, we have also generational trauma. That means that the people, even though they haven't experienced the trauma themselves, they can still suffer from some maybe symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, of the trauma that maybe was experienced by the grandmother or grandfather. And if you are new to this channel, please subscribe and make sure you're gonna hit the notification bell so you're gonna be always notified when I upload new video and new short, so you're not gonna miss out on this really interesting content. And I'm gonna see you in the next one, and thank you. Bye bye.